One time when I was in college, I was working at a local variety store, like a dollar store kind of thing. And this very racist man named Mark Justice became the new manager of my department. He said he would not have a nigger working for him in his department, and he fired me in the department. In front of the store people, as I was leaving, I lit into him pretty hard. It was quite a public spectacle of me leaving after he called me that. And I immediately got some unemployment insurance, that kind of thing. But I was already been drafted into the Army, so a few weeks later I was gone. So, those kind of experiences certainly made for a pretty unique perspective of that. So from that aspect of it, I've received many harassments. I've been fired from jobs. I've been shaving my head for about 25 years because frankly, I was starting to go bald a bit, and I felt more comfortable being bald. I mean, being a shaved head than having this patch on the back of my head and a receding hairline. And people would say, "Well, you have a very nicely shaped head." So I said, "Okay, I'll keep shaving it."
I
Uh,
don't understand is that if you grow up in a household where your parents are of color, they can help you navigate these crazy, horrible experiences that children of color have. But if you grow up in a Irish, German, Catholic household and you're not talking about where you come from, nobody's giving you any help on how to deal with this stuff.
that's absolutely correct. So in view of that, there's the denial. And then in a child's mentality, this confusion as to, what's going on with all this. So finally in 2014, I was watching Who Do You Think You Are? And that's when I was first exposed to the ancestry.com. And frankly, it was the reason I got the attention was that Ashley Judd was being interviewed, and her family came from a similar location in Massachusetts, as did my father. And she described some family names that my sister, who was just a paper genealogist, had described because my family are Mayflower descendants. They came over on the Mayflower. So I said to my wife, "Hey, maybe I'm related to Ashley Judd." So I spent $100, spit into the tube. And I tell people who have not taken a test or who are questioning about it is that when you spit into that tube, you've got to be ready for anything that comes down the pike. And I had the same mindset that anything that I find, I'm just going to find to the very end. I'm not going to avoid any kind of uncomfort or disturbing information. So I did the whole thing, found out that I was 36% sub-Sahara Africa, mostly Nigeria. And when that occurred, I started doing some tests with my siblings outside of Ancestry. Although actually I did do one with a sister, and she came back with 0% African roots. And then I knew that, okay, this is substantial because she was my older sister and looks like all my other siblings. So that was that. Then I had to make sure that we did a X chromosome where with a younger brother, and that's when I determined that I did not have the same father. And then because I'd always thought that maybe I'd been switched at birth at a hospital, I needed to do a mitochondrial DNA test to see if we had the same mother. So after those 3 or 4 tests, whatever they were, I found that no, I've got a different father with that. However, by this time my parents had passed away. So at that point, I knew that. I just didn't know the name or any name and how to pursue that.
Now, I know that it's really hard when we figure that out, but I mean, most people aren't going to be like, was I switched at birth? But I can see how you'd think that. Were you looking at the matches at all? Did you have any paternal matches?
Well, that's when those came up. And at some point, there was a young woman in Wichita who I was related to at about like the second cousin level.
Hmm.
Actually, I found out that she's a grand niece of mine. So I started finding some connections there of people with percentages of centimorgans that were closer to mine. And she was just looking for help trying to find her father, but I couldn't help her because I didn't know mine. It wasn't until I used a genealogy service, DNA Angels, that it took 4 years for my search angel to finally come up with a name. And from that, I've been able to contact that side of my Black family. Her name was Dominique, and she's since then found her father, and I've met them. I didn't get a real warm reception with them, but there you go.
For
So
people who don't know, DNA Angels is amazing. They help people identify their genetic family, their parent, for free. And they do a fabulous job. I work a lot with their founder, Laura. I know
great
your
woman.
case took a very long time.
I was there first.
You
I
were their
was
first,
their first
and
client.
yeah, and it took a very, very long time. I tell people, to me, because it took me about 4 months to identify my family. I felt like I was in purgatory for 4 months because I had no context on which to kind of rebuild my sense of self. I'm just kind of curious how it was for you navigating that unknown for so long.
I think it was kind of difficult navigating it, not so much for I'd already been exposed and experienced with my own struggles with the identity. But as I became an adult and more sensitive to people's innuendos and their questions and things like that, once I found out what my identity was, just purely from a racial standpoint, it was more difficult then because by them not telling me, I didn't have any kind of racial, um, oh, what's the word I want to use? I didn't have any sounding board. I had no frame of reference for being Black.
You had no lived experience.
No lived experience as a Black person, but a lot of confusion by people who wouldn't accept me as being Black or white. I've been told many times, you're in a screwed position. You're not Black enough. You're not white enough. But the downside to this, and what triggers me now as a 73-year-old man, is when I see biracial children, I always want to wonder, well, I wonder if they went through the same thing, or were they informed of their situation, or what has been their situation. Keep in mind, I was born in 1952 in East Texas, and my father was a Black man. And many of your viewers or listeners may not understand the word miscegenation, but very much like the comedian Trevor Noah in apartheid South Africa, I was basically an illegal child. It was against the law for whites and Blacks to have kids, essentially.
You have the lived experience of a person of color. You just didn't
Oh,
know that's what it was in my
yeah,
mind. And but without the context, it just makes it so confusing.
yeah,
I know growing up mixed myself, I'm 51, and it was, you have to be one thing or the other, or you couldn't be both, or the one drop rule applied and you're just Black because you got one
mhm,
drop of Black and therefore you're Black. But I felt like I had context at least for that. And if I experienced anything, I've been called things like half calf and Oreo and all the things I'm sure you have been too.
yeah,
But I could go to my grandfather and be like, Pop, when people would follow my dad, my raising dad, and my kids around in the mall because they wondered why a Black man was stealing little tiny blonde haired, blue eyed boys, I had people to talk to about those
yeah.
situations. And you just didn't. And so I can see how, I mean, even the affirmation of your ethnicity in 2014 probably left a lot for you to try to contemplate and navigate.
It still does. At some point, after about 4.5 years, and I found a name, uh, I have that, but I've never seen a photograph of my birth father. I did have a half brother that my birth father had. His children are my niece and nephew. And I visited with them, and I'm looking at them trying to see how I resemble them, and these kind of things, and that really provided no answer. So yeah, I've been through the whole thing with it, and it's still, yeah, basically it haunts me. I've just learned to live with it so much, but it's made me I kind of think an expert on not so much being biracial, but being biracial and hoodwinked all your life about it, and what it does to the psyche of a young boy, not an infant, but a toddler and preschool and elementary grades, those formative years. If you have children and you constantly raise your hand like you're going to hit them, all their life they're going to be ducking a little bit. And it's a mental and emotional ducking of those kinds of things that eventually come up.
We do
And
bring some hard truths to the table. I didn't really meet my Black family till I was 7, but I was a child and I could ask those stupid questions that you feel uncomfortable asking as an adult. I remember one of the first questions I asked my grandfather when he would lift up his shirt, he certainly had a lighter tummy than the rest of his head and body. And I was like, does your color rub off? As a 7-year-old who
mm-hmm.
hadn't really been around anybody of color until then. And when you get older, you feel stupid asking those sorts of questions.
I lived in Wichita many years of my life and moved back and forth there a couple of times. And I remember I lived on Brady Street, and by that time I would have been maybe kindergarten age. And I remember that a Black man came to our house for some reason. I think he was a utility worker or something, but it was hot, and my mother gave him some water in the house. And she had a sleeve of saltines, just the ones you get in the 4 packs. And I was talking to him, and I think I asked him how many were in this little package. And he was counting them by two. He didn't take them out, he just counted them. And what struck with me then and even now was that I was amazed that he could count. He could actually count things because I'd never been around a Black person who could count. So yeah, that had quite the effect. Not only that, but all sorts of references that probably never got much better when I got into the service, and those kinds of things, because then you're thrown together with races of all types, and there's a lot of discrimination in the military, but you're in basic training or you get to your duty station and things like that. You just work as best you can with it. And I had some unique experiences in my military career that were rather difficult to deal with that because of my perceived race.